Welcome to Leverage to Build Wealth, where we discuss and educate entrepreneurs, mortgage, real estate, and financial service professionals on how to leverage tools and other people's experience to truly leverage to build wealth to create the lifestyle and legacy you desire. Hello, welcome to today's episode of Leverage to Build Wealth. Today's very special guest is someone very special to my heart. My wife is attorney JJ Childers. Now, he's no ordinary attorney by any stretch. He specializes in asset protection and wealth planning, estates, and especially avoiding taxes in the legal way, so you only have to pay what you legally have to, and especially with this time right now, it's 3 days after tax time, everyone should be really recognizing the need for having a true professional like JJ in their corner. Now, a little bit of background real quick about JJ. He is the author of Trump University's Asset Protection, which is incredible. This thing is worth more than the weight in gold of which it has, and it's incredible. My wife and I, on a personal note, we went to JJ's office in Arkansas after a seminar back in 2012. And we had the pleasure of meeting JJ over the weekend and getting advanced trainings with him. And so without any reservation of any professional I will ever have on this platform, JJ is the one who I highly endorse and love very much, because his stuff sticks. It's not just philosophies. It's validated in court over and over again. He is the man. He is the authority. And if you're to think of the sports of growing finance, he's the defensive MVP of all time. And it comes to from his professional background. Like, he is that awesome. And so with that, JJ, please tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go from there, sir.
Wow. Well, first of all, you did such a great job introducing me. It kind of makes my head big a little bit. I tell you, I've got to try to maintain humility here. I certainly appreciate that. And I've appreciated working with you over the years. I've been watching what you've been doing, and I love it. Leverage to build wealth, it's got all the concepts right there that I love. As far as obviously we all love wealth, we all love building it, but I love the aspect of leverage. And I know you talk about a lot of different ways to do that. And that's vitally important. I'm going to kind of build on what you talked about. Well, first of all, let me give a little background. As you mentioned, my name is JJ Childers, and I'm a wealth protection attorney. And essentially what that means is, for a lot of people, they think about, okay, an attorney, you go to court, you represent people, you do things like that. Well, actually, everything that I do is outside of the courtroom. Fact is, we were kind of visiting beforehand, and I told you, I'm not going to see the inside of a courtroom unless something goes terribly wrong. So what I always focus on is helping people stay out of the courtroom. And it's not just with regard to lawsuits, but also wanting to make sure that you stay out of having to pay excessive taxes, and making sure that you stay out of the probate court whenever you pass away, so you're able to pass on your wealth to your heirs and beneficiaries in a way that they keep more of the money. Because I don't know many people. Fact is, I haven't found anybody yet that says, the reason I get up and work so hard and grind and do everything that I do is so that I can give more money to the government. I've not yet to come across anybody that has had that position. Maybe there's someone out there, but they don't tend to gravitate towards me for whatever reason. So, I love what you said there earlier, Tom, as far as, the defensive aspect of it. One of the things that I always talk about is, to win championships, sure, you've got to have a good offense. But at the same time, if you don't have a good defense, or at least a defense that's going to keep things to where you end up on top, you lose.
Yes.
It's just, it doesn't matter. People will say, okay, we've got, we're scoring so many points. Well, if the other team scores more points, you still lose. So we've got to make sure that not only we have the offensive strategies, which you're so good at teaching, I love what you're doing with the insurance and, so many of those things, and the flexibility that comes in with that, and basically being able to utilize it, almost as your own bank, basically on some of these things where you're building the cash value and having that flexibility is just amazing. And it's some of my wealthiest clients, that's what they do. They say, forget dealing with banks. I'm going to be my own bank and then pay myself, because they say these banks are big and are building bigger buildings all the time. And it's not because they're not making money. So how
Yes.
about we have our own bank and we make that money for ourselves rather than paying somebody else. So I love what you're doing. And you covered the offensive part so well, but we've got to make sure we cover the defensive part. And really that's what I do. So as introducing myself, I'd say that's the primary focus I've had for my entire legal career, which I've been doing this now. Next year will be 30 years
Wow.
that I've been practicing law, which it doesn't seem possible. And sometimes
Wow.
it seems way longer than that. And then other times it doesn't seem like, how's it possible that the time has gone by that quickly? But a lot of it is just I love doing what I do because I love what I'm able to do for my clients, what I'm able to do to help people, build wealth for themselves.
You know, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I have a lot of friends who are attorneys. I was contemplating in a past life a while to be an attorney. I was contemplating to be an attorney or to go into the banking. And I decided, you know what, I'm gonna have enough student loans. And so I decided to go into banking. But I have an attorney's mindset, especially with a lot of my buddies, is just like how I view and how to look at stuff. And it's not just black and white. There's so much gray and so much that's left up to interpretation. And that growing up, my mom, is like, why do I feel you're going to be an attorney? It seems like every time everything rules were always being rebutted. But uh, a lot of attorneys seem to be a dime a dozen, but the truly valuable attorneys are priceless. And that's what I found, with my interactions with you, your reviews online before I even was able to go and meet you in person are just stellar, and also well established. You've written multiple books, which are highlighted on the picture of the channel. And there's so much more. You do a lot of seminars. You literally have taught thousands of people every year, going throughout the country to talk about this important concept. And so today's episode is going to be different than a lot of other ones. This one's going to be more technical because to have someone like you on the line, I really want to take advantage of your technical knowledge for everyone, and also to give people the invitation to truly reach out to you, because you can help people in all states, and there's no portfolio that you can't take care of, and that's one thing is incredible, and I know they would be well done. So I know your three pillars that you talk a lot about are protecting assets, planning their estate, and reducing taxes. Now, right now, since we're just coming out of tax season, a lot of people are feeling that pain. You ever see that video of that kind of like it's gone to a meme status now of that boy playing Monopoly afterwards, and he's just like he's all just crying. Everyone's like, "What's wrong? You're doing so good." He goes, "I didn't pay taxes." And it's so true. But I like you to take the lead on however you want to go about from this point on, because I mean you're the expert in this regard. So why don't you go and take it from here, and what's really important, and especially now in today's market when we're spending like a drunken sailor who has no cares in the world. We're paying for wars we're not in. We're dumping money everywhere. The value of our money goes lower and lower, especially with inflation. What are you seeing with your clients of how they're adjusting and pivoting in this type of market?
Well, it's a great point, Tom. And, one of the things that I tell people all the time is I firmly, firmly believe that we should all pay our fair share in taxes. However, what I found is most people believe, as I do, that our fair share should be as next to nothing as possible.
Yeah.
So the great thing about that is that there are legal strategies, 100% perfectly legal strategies that will enable us to do that. And that's what we focus on, because from the outset, I always tell people, if you're looking to do something to evade taxes or to cheat on your taxes, I'm not your guy. I mean, people will say, yeah, but I mean, I'll pay you a lot of money. I say, well, you can't pay me enough money because that's not what I do. And what I always try to explain to people is that there's no need for that.
Yes.
Why would you want to do something shady when there's so many things that you can do that are 100% legal that a lot of these tax, I guess tax strategists, sometimes they'll almost be anti-government. And I got to tell you, I am far from being anti-government. I'm not going to let the government control my entire life, but at the same time, the government is who gives me these strategies.
Yes.
Were it not for the government that provided all these strategies, I wouldn't have anything to do. So the key is you've got to know what those strategies are, but then you've got to take advantage of those. And the biggest challenge is most people just have no clue. And part of it is because we're not taught this in our school systems.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell people all the time, I say, okay, remember that class that you had in grade school called How to Protect Your Assets? Oh, no, you don't remember that one? Well, what about that one that says how to pay less in taxes? Well, that one's not there either. Well, same thing. Then I say, oh, but surely they covered it in middle school. No. Well, what about in high school? No, it's not covered there. And then I say, okay, but for those of you who went to college, remember they covered it in depth there, surely, right? No, it's not covered there either.
Yeah.
So when we look at this is very specialized knowledge,
Yes.
and it's information that you have to go out and seek. It's not just going to be provided as part of a general core curriculum on any sort of training program, which is really where I've made a career, not only in helping clients to implement these strategies, but to me, one of the vitally important parts of it is the education. And you made reference to my books that I've written, and I know you've had copies of my home study course, various home study courses. There's one right there. And to me, it's important because when we talk about that mindset, part of what I love about your podcast is that you're always talking about the importance of mindset. Well, that's the key to all of this, is having the mindset where you're open to new ideas, where you're looking for new strategies, and where you're ready to take action on those strategies. Because the challenge a lot of times comes into the fact that many people say, no, I need to learn a little bit more, then I'll be ready to do it. Well, that's the paralysis of analysis, where you say, okay, well, once I just learn this one next piece, well, there's always going to be part of the way that you learn is by actually doing. And I tell people all the time, no, here's what we're going to do, but you have to actually do it.
Yes.
And rather than getting caught up in that paralysis of analysis, you've got to take action. And part of it is you're taking action based upon solid, proven strategies. It's not something that you're saying, okay, let's be speculative. No, these are solid, proven strategies that have their support in the case law, that have their support in the tax code, that have their support in the legislative enactments that have been passed, the laws. So the key is making sure that you're aware of these and then taking advantage of them. You focused, you mentioned earlier, I focused on those three key areas. Part of the reason for that is that I believe the government and other sources out there are attempting to place what I call a lid on wealth. And that lid is an acronym for the three legal pitfalls of lawsuits, income taxes, and death taxes. Lawsuits, income taxes, and death taxes. Now, when we think about those, first of all, lawsuits. Studies have shown that in this country, there's a new lawsuit filed on average every 30 seconds.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so I mean, think about it. In the short time we've been together here today, there have already been dozens of lawsuits filed.
Oh.
So this is kind of crazy that there are people suing other people. And one thing that I think is a little telling is that they say 1 out of every 4 people will be sued each and every year.
Yeah.
Well, if you think about that, that's across the board. That's factoring in infants, toddlers, children, the elderly, the homeless. That's factoring in all these folks who are probably not being sued a whole lot.
Wow.
Well, if it's factoring in all of them, that what that tells us is that there are certain people that are being sued quite a bit, excessively, in my opinion. And part of that is, who are those people that are being sued so much? Because, I talk to people and they'll say, well, I've never been sued. And I'm saying, okay, do you have a business? Well, no, I work for someone else. Okay, have you ever been in real estate? Have you purchased rental properties? Have you gone out there and taken action and done some of these things that are kind of outside the norm? Yeah. And if you haven't, you're not going to necessarily have as much exposure. But at the same time, you don't have the same opportunities to build wealth that come from being involved and engaged in those out-of-the-box type of activities. Absolutely. So we've got to make sure they had that overall plan in place. So that's with lawsuits. That's why we focus on asset protection. And then when we talk about the income taxes, I can say 1 out of every 4 people will be sued each and every year, but guess what? 4 out of every 4 people who generate income are going to be subjected to income taxes each and every year.
Yes.
So it's vitally important that we have a plan in place to reduce those taxes. And I'm going to spend some time talking with us specifically about that as well. But it's not just going to happen for you. You've got to make sure that you identify potential deductions and then you take advantage of those deductions.
Yes.
And I'm gonna share some information a little bit later about the fact that our system is rigged. Absolutely, positively, unequivocally, it's rigged. Well, I don't mean in some sort of conspiratorial way. No, it's right out in the open. It's rigged in favor of businesses rather than us as individuals on our personal income tax. So you've got to make sure that if you have a business on the side, if you don't have one, you need to have one.
Yes.
If you do, make sure that it's structured through a legal entity, because those legal entities are going to have access to deductions that we as individuals just don't have. And then finally, lawsuits, the income tax, now the death taxes. Now, not necessarily talking specifically about estate taxes. To me, I'm saying any imposition of taxes, fees, or cost to our wealth falls under the category of death taxes. So for that, we've got to focus on the area of estate planning. And a lot of times people will think, oh, well, I'll get around to having an estate plan once I have a lot of wealth. Well, the reality is we don't know when our time is going to come. None of us has that crystal ball that we can say, okay, I know that I've got about 20 more years, so I'll set up my estate plan in 18 years. You can't do it that way. You've got to have that plan in place from the very beginning, because that's kind of the foundation upon which we build and we implement the legal entities, the insurance, the retirement plans, the accounts. All of the different things have to be structured, in consideration and in coordination with our overall estate plan. Primarily, that's going to be through the use of a trust.
Yeah, we can't do it retroactively. It's
right.
You can't have it. Oh man, I wish I could have. Nope. Let the date started. So crucial.
Absolutely. And a lot of times people will procrastinate and they say, well, I just don't want to have to think about that. Well, guess what? You have to think about that, because it's not a matter of if some of these things are going to happen. It's a matter of when. So we've got to make sure that we have a plan in place before rather than after. And you probably recall, at my seminars and in my courses, I generally talk about a concept of an asset security system. So basically, I kind of draw that analogy to a home security system. And then I talk about the various components that go into designing and activating that personal security system for your home. You've got to do the same thing for your business and personal assets from a financial standpoint. So that's really what we're doing. Now, I always ask the question, I say, I like to think there's no such thing as a stupid question, but there are some that are what I'll refer to as, shall we say, borderline. And I always ask the question, I say, when is the time to have a plan? Before it's too late or after it's too late? And people generally laugh a little bit and they'll always say, well, before. And I say, okay, but now here's the follow-up question. When do most people get burglar alarms installed? And then they laugh a little more and they say, after they've been burglarized. You see, the challenge is we know in theory what we should do, but in practice, a lot of times we don't actually do it. And that's the difference in so many instances of what I see and what I encounter in my work with clients and those who never become clients. The difference between those people that get the type of success that they most want in life and those that don't is taking action. Not just taking action to pursue those opportunities, but also taking action on implementing the defensive measures as well. Because I don't know if somebody's going to be sued. I can't guarantee that. What I can guarantee is that they're going to be subject to taxes if they're making money. And I can also guarantee that they're going to die at some point. So for that, we've got to make sure that we have a plan in place for the tax reduction planning as well as the estate planning. So that's really kind of the core upon which we build with everything, or in those 3 areas. And one of the things I always point out, Tom, is that there may be certain strategies that may be tremendous from an asset protection standpoint, but they're not going to save you 1 red cent when it comes to your taxes. Well, that's okay. We didn't set it up to save us in taxes. We set it up to protect us from potential liability.
Yes.
And then conversely, there may be strategies that are amazing from a tax mitigation standpoint, but they don't give us any asset protection. That's okay. We had the other strategies here, and these they kind of blend together to give us the most rock solid, ironclad plan possible. And it's all under the purview of our estate plan. So that's how it all ties in together. That is kind of the tent under which we compile our wealth and we preserve that wealth on an ongoing basis.
That's really cool. I want to go and pull up some relevant points of why this may matter. Some people like, what? They may feel maybe I don't have a portfolio big enough yet, or they're like, oh, I definitely need to. Well, then that just makes the your services the obvious choice, and those are wonderful. But I think the majority. We'll say, if we use like a bell curve, you got the 10% who definitely know they need you in your services, and they either have you or someone like you. Like I can't think of anyone who comes close to your expertise, really. But those 10% are like the slam dunk. They know it. They are aware of it. They're educated. Maybe their business requires it. I mean, those are easy. Then you got the 10% that no matter what, God Himself can put you up in front and says, "Hey, do this," and they're like, "No." You can walk on water, and they're going to say, "What's wrong with swimming?" Is there's a 10% that won't do anything, but the 80% who don't quite know yet, or they're going back and forth as to why. I'd like to go ahead and point out a couple things, kind of similar to what you did to us whenever we came to your office. And was that is look at the state of the economy right now. Not everyone's going gangbusters. Some really are, though. Some people are doing really phenomenal in this economy, and I think that's great. And there's some who are just getting pulverized, and there's a lot of that in between. But one thing that's for sure is inflation cannot escape anybody. It's touching everybody's wallet no matter what, and your dollar just isn't going as far unless you are properly structuring different kind of ways to make it work. But one thing is for sure is that there are a lot of people who are desperate. And when people are desperate, they do not make good choices. Think about it. Any particular choice you make in your life that is influenced by desperation is almost destined to fail, blow up in your face, and reeks of regret. But with that being said, are those decisions being made? Yes, a resounding yes. And when people's finances are struggling, they find creative ways to go after what they perceive others to have a lot of. And that they think, oh, well, they have enough. Well, I don't mind taking from that. They have enough to spare. And that's where this protection aspect comes from. And it's all based on perceptions, right? And so I remember you had this case study. I believe it was a furniture business where there is a mom and her kid going, and this lady tripped over her own kid and sued the furniture store and won. It was her own kid, and she tripped over her kid and somehow sued. That blows my mind of how that's possible. And amongst a whole lot. I mean, I remember you coming up with all these different lawsuits that were just real to say, this is what happened. This was recent. I remember one you had like a recent case that happened within like last week. And like, this is real. People, they see you driving a nice car, especially to those people who got Teslas. I know you guys love them, but a whole lot of other people think that you have endless amount of money. You drive a Tesla, you're just saying, sue me. Not to mention the Benz and the Beamers. I mean, they're great cars. But that just yells, sue me, no matter if you're one of those $40,000 millionaires, who thinks, they want to project that they have a lot of wealth. Now, don't get me wrong. The premise of this show is leverage to build wealth. We want people to build wealth. That doesn't mean you go flaunt it at all. Now, you can if you want, but we see those memes all the time on Facebook of, the Rolexes, the people, they're looking at the Rolex, they got the steering wheel of all their fancy cars and all this stuff. For me, I just see lawsuits. When I see you flaunting that, I'm thinking getting robbed, at gunpoint. That's what I'm thinking. But with going about with this state of this current economy, when so many people are desperate, people are losing homes left and right. Credit card debt's at its all-time high. We're at $14 trillion, I think, right now in credit card debt. People are desperate, and they're looking for ways to get quick money and they think a lawsuit and like, oh, maybe they'll settle, they'll go into this. And so I just wanted to point that out for people who are listening who maybe on the fence. It's like, I don't know if I want to do this. I'm like, it's just like an investment in an account. The time value of money is on your side the sooner you implement it, because once the lawsuit starts, you can't go up to, JJ and say, hey, JJ, all right, I've been doing really well. I think I screwed up some paperwork or something, but someone's starting to sue me. What can you do to help me? When that happens, what's your response, JJ?
Well, let me kind of, you've covered a lot of stuff there that I think is important, which is great because it helps tee me up for a couple different things that I want to cover.
Perfect.
So first of all, I represent a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life. And, at this point now, basically, I don't do just a whole lot of marketing, but because everything comes to me through referrals, from professionals like you that refer people over, or just other current clients, things like that. So I remember this is a little while back, I was referred over. One of the clients was an entertainer on the Las Vegas Strip. He had his own show on the Strip at one of the big hotels, and he was referred over to me, and we did kind of our initial chit chat. And I said, okay, what can I do for you? He said, well, it's pretty basic. I just want to keep my assets out of the sewers. And I said, keep your assets out of the sewers? I'm not really following you here. I'm not sure what you mean by that. He said, well, it's pretty basic, and I'm going to explain it to you the way he explained it to me. He said, basically, what do you call someone who teaches? I said, a teacher. I said, okay. And he said, what do you call someone who speaks? I said, a speaker. He said, what do you call someone who sues? I said, okay, a suer. I got you now. Okay, now I'm following you. I said, I guess that means I'm not so much an attorney as I'm involved in sewer management, which, okay, that's fine. I didn't know that was my career option, but I'm okay with that. So you look at, there are a lot of sewers out there, and when people are in desperate situations, they'll do things that they may not do otherwise. When you look at this, when your back's against the wall, you may see no other way out. You may do things that you wouldn't do in more prosperous times. Well, we've got to prepare for that. And the way that we do that is making sure that we understand having liability protection in place. Now, a lot of times when people think about liability, they think, okay, well, I need to be involved in something with limited liability. Well, there are activities that have limited liability. Let's say that I decided I wanted to start trading, cryptocurrency. And I said, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set aside maybe $50,000 for this, or I'm going to set aside $100,000 for this. Well, my liability is limited to the amount that I've set aside to invest in there, because chances are somebody that I buy cryptocurrency from is not going to sue me because it went to zero. If anything, I would sue them. Not that I'd have that case, because I understand I'm taking that risk, but my liability, there's a finite amount that I'm going to lose unless I'm doing something on margin with a brokerage account or something else. But when we're talking about certain activities, there is limited liability. When we start getting into other activities like real estate or starting a business, when we open ourselves up to lawsuits, we don't have limited liability anymore. Now we have unlimited liability, which is why we have to take steps to implement limited liability when it's not there, innately, like in the brokerage account or with the cryptocurrency or anything like that. So now the way that we do that is through the use of legal entities. And by legal entities, we're talking about things like corporations, limited partnerships, limited liability companies, S corporations. And the whole concept of a limited liability company is essentially, your liability is limited to what's in the company. Well, that's a great concept. Unfortunately, people abuse that concept. And what I mean by that is that they'll say, okay, I'm going to set up one LLC. They set up one LLC and they use it to operate their entire business and their entire, operations. And I tell them, I say, I say, well, why did you do that? They say, well, because I want to make sure my liability is limited. I say, well, it's limited to the entire company.
Yes.
Translation, you've got all your eggs in one basket. If something happens to that basket, now you've lost all your eggs. So we've got to make sure that we have strategies, tactics, tools that are in place that we can utilize to limit that liability. And it's not just one. It's going to be, I apply a strategy I call isolation and insulation.
Okay.
Now, isolation and insulation basically means that we isolate assets and we isolate activities into separate legal entities. Now, we do that so that we can insulate those assets and activities from the potential liability of our other assets and activities. Now, I know that's a mouthful, so I'm going to repeat it just real quick. We isolate assets and activities into separate legal entities so that we can insulate those assets and activities from the liability of other assets and activities. So what I mean by that is a lot of times people will have, even if you have one business, you've got various functions of that business. For instance, I've got some doctor clients, I've got other clients that have different functions. Like, let's say they have their practice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's going to be in one separate legal entity. And then at that practice, they have equipment. You think about a doctor's office or a dentist's office, all of that equipment is pretty valuable. So then what they'll do is they'll set up a separate legal entity that owns the equipment, that then leases that equipment to the practice in exchange for a lease payment. So now that's a different legal entity. And then
so if the doctor's office gets sued, the assets of the equipment is protected.
separate. That's right, because it's in a separate legal entity that has its own limited liability. And there's no real cause of action against that, because anybody suing is going to sue the practice for maybe malpractice or any injuries that they occurred, not necessarily the owner of the equipment. And then the next one that they'll have is maybe they own their own office building. So then that office building is owned in yet another legal entity, and then the practice leases that from them. Now, I want to touch on something that you mentioned earlier, as far as the Tesla, for instance. Sometimes the takeaway that people have from information that you just shared is, okay, we're not allowed to drive a Tesla, or we're not allowed to drive a BMW, or a Mercedes, or a Range Rover, or whatever it may be. I say, no, absolutely you can't. Now, follow me here, because sometimes people are going to tune me out. And I say, if you lease that vehicle, it's not your vehicle. So if you lease that vehicle and you get into an accident, they can't take that from you because it's not yours. Now, that does not mean that I'm telling you that you should lease your Mercedes from Mercedes-Benz Credit Corporation or lease your Range Rover from Land Rover. No, what I'm saying is, if you look at it and you say, because I have people all the time that they say, no, I listen to Dave Ramsey, and he specifically says you don't want to lease your vehicle because he calls it a fleece. He says the leasing company is making all the money. You're not ever building up any equity. I say, okay, fine. You just told me the leasing companies make a lot of money. It's just like we talked about earlier. Banks are making a lot of money. How about I be my own bank?
Yes.
Well, leasing companies are making all this money. How about I start my own leasing company?
Yes.
So what I mean by that is I can then purchase those assets, whether it's a vehicle, a truck, equipment, whatever we're talking about. I set that separate company up that purchases those assets, and then that company leases those assets back to the primary company. So now I'm in the same position I was earlier, as if I leased it from someone else, but now I'm just leasing it from myself.
Yes.
So this is an example of how we can get asset protection through the implementation of multiple legal entities. Now, biggest challenge I have a lot of times is that people mistakenly believe that they don't need additional entities or multiple entities until they have a vast amount of wealth. Well, I'm going to make a statement right now that is going to sound crazy for many people, this is part of what I like to do that differentiates me from other people out there, is that I'll make a statement that sounds crazy, but then I explain it and they're going, well, that makes sense. But it's not something that you would typically read in an ordinary book or anything out there. The statement is this right here. The lower your overall net worth, the more entities you may need. Now I'm going to say it again, because that just sounds contrary to what we would think. The lower your net worth, the more entities you may need. Now, the reason I point that out is, let's just go through a quick illustration. Let's say that I'm worth $50 million. If I'm worth $50 million and I decide, you know what, I'm going to take 1 million of my total net worth, and I'm going to invest it in maybe some properties in Detroit. And I can buy a house for $50,000 in Detroit, so I'm going to buy 20 of them for my $1 million. All right, well, if I put them all in one entity, and that means they're all exposed. If somebody slips and falls on one of them and sues me, they could end up taking all of them. So they could say, okay, I only have a $50,000 house right here, but I slip and fall on it. They sue me for $1 million. Let's say they win, they get a judgment against me. Well, by me, I'm talking about my limited liability company.
Yes.
Well, they could take all 20 of those properties and get that judgment. I could lose a full $1 million, but at least I know it's capped out at that $1 million.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if I'm worth $50 million and somebody sues me for $1 million and I lose that, well, I can promise you I'm not going to be happy at all. But at the same time, that's not going to devastate me financially. I mean, I'm not going to have to cancel cable next month to make ends meet.
Yeah.
Still going to be okay.
Yeah.
However, let's kind of flip the switch a little bit and say, well, what if my total net worth was $1 million? Or maybe even if it's $1.2 million. So I said, I didn't put all of that into real estate in that one entity. But if all I had was that one entity and the same thing happened to me and my net worth's only, $1 million, I'm wiped out. I've now lost everything because I only had one entity. So you see what I mean is that the person that had $50 million could have withstood that loss, but they only had one entity. Somebody that has a lower net worth, which is still significant, that's pretty sizable. You're doing well. You got $1 million, but if you lose all of that, you're done. You're devastated. You need more than just that one entity. Fact is, you may need 5 entities with 4 houses each, or you could feel more comfortable having 10 entities with 2 houses each. So you look at that, and when we take this approach, and that's really what it is. We talked about mindset earlier. This is a mindset of understanding how am I going to approach my wealth protection? Because typically, if you just look at an LLC, say, here's what you need as an LLC. Well, does that mean that you need a separate LLC for every one of those properties? I wouldn't go that far either, because here's the deal. We talk about leverage. One of my favorite things of real estate is that we can control a lot of property through the use of leverage, meaning other people's money, whether it's the bank's money that's loaning us the money that we can buy it. So now I can control a lot with just a little. Well, if I buy that $50,000 house and I put 20% down, so $10,000, and somebody sues me and it's all in one LLC, the maximum I stand to lose is $10,000. Well, okay. What if I bought a house next door for $50,000 and I put 20% down? That's another $10,000. So depending upon my overall circumstances, if I was sued in that LLC that has both of those, sure, I recognize that I could lose both properties, but what I've really lost is $20,000. And the reality is, if all I have at risk is $20,000, somebody's probably not going to sue me because they realize that's all they can get. Now, they may sue me for the insurance, but the insurance company is going to defend against that. So that's something we've got to make sure we understand as well.
How
So
about that?
this is important.
Can we talk about that point real quick? Because one thing I remember you telling us was because you used to work, I believe, in the plaintiff office for a while, and you understood what the process is. So when someone gets hurt, so let's kind of flip it. So if someone gets hurt and they go talk to an attorney, the ones that say free consultation, we don't get paid unless you win. If I remember you going through a process of what happens on the back end, whenever the person's talking to the attorney, what's the paralegal doing? Give us a hint on that so people can understand, because they may not be thinking, hey, what's going on? What happens in that office when someone's talking and they're giving their story to the attorney? What's really happening behind the scenes to see if you got a case?
Yeah, so and see, that's going to be very important for a number of different points. First of all, it was amazing that I was able to get that background and that experience, because I got to see how the opponent's thinking. Part of putting on a good defense is understanding the tactics from the offense. So working in a plaintiff's law firm, essentially, you look at this and you say, all right, attorneys are advertising all the time. I mean, you hear these ads on the radio or you see them online, whatever, and they sound like have you been injured in an accident? If so, call the law offices of Rob, Steele, and Cheatham, for your free, no risk, no cost, no obligation consultation to discuss potential theories of recovery. I heard one time, it said, have you been in an accident? You may not realize you were injured. I'm going, you may not realize you were injured. Yes, come to our office for a free, no risk, no cost, no obligation consultation to discuss potential theories of recovery. Well, the whole point of coming into that office is so that they can say, well, let's find out the details to see if you may have a good case. Who did you wreck into? What assets do they have? We can do a quick asset search, especially nowadays online, everything's so automated. We can find out all sorts of things about people and say, do they have assets? If they have assets, now perhaps that prospective client is a bit more interesting to me because now there's potential money for me to go after. Now, if they get into an accident with somebody that looks like they're broke because we can't identify any assets to go after, I don't want to take that case, because the one thing about it is I don't care how much money you have. The one thing we all have the same amount of is time. And you can
Yes.
say, okay, well, we've got time. We can hire a bunch of associates that are working for us, and then they can do it. Yeah, but they still only have so much time. And I want our time best utilized by going after the high ticket potential paydays. I'm not going to go after a bunch of, but see, that's the thing. In law school, you're taught we want to seek justice. We say, I want to be an attorney to make sure that justice is served. Well, the reality is you get out of law school and you want to make sure that dinner is served.
Yes.
Justice doesn't feed my family. If I want to put
Good
food on the
point.
table, I got to show me the money, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of that process. And I think it's important because that's where privacy comes in. One of the things through the use of different types of legal entities, LLCs, depending on where you set this up, you can have greater privacy. Now, I think sometimes people go overboard when it comes to privacy. Sometimes I have clients that they want so much privacy that I'm almost scared because I say, what are you trying to do? I don't,
Yeah. What's the plan?
yeah, I'm worried about this because you're so concerned about privacy that I'm saying, are you planning on doing something illegal? If so, I'm not going to help you with that. So that's vitally important. So it determines, what type of entity are you going to set up? Where are you going to set up that entity? Are you going to have it utilized through holding companies? Are you going to have things maybe titled in the name of trusts? And now we're not talking about the same thing with regard to maybe your trust for your estate plan, but maybe just a title holding entity for your real estate transactions, like a land trust, or what I refer to it as is a real estate privacy trust, because
Mm.
it provides us with privacy for anybody, for those sewers out there. Again, we got to keep our assets out of the sewers. That's part
Yes.
of how we do that.
Well, wow. All right. So you're giving us so much wonderful action. I want to honor your time. I have a whole lot more time available. Whatever your time is that you're willing to share. I know from what I promised you, we got about 7 more minutes or so. But your discretion on how you want to take it from here. And so at this particular point, uh, whenever you feel you want to wind it down, I want to be able to people know how to reach you, how to be able to contact you for your services, and I highly recommend it. I did myself, and that's one thing at the very onset when I was talking with my wife about wanting to create this channel. I'm like, the one person I want more than anybody is JJ, because what good is building wealth if you can't protect it? And I mean that. And my wife, as soon as we were able to communicate and get you on, my wife was so excited because she loves you. You're a good man, a good Christian man, and you live your beliefs, and you see that philosophy when you meet with you in person. And I really love that about you. But please let people know how to reach you directly if they want to contact you for their services. If you have an event coming, because I know you're always doing all different kinds of events. If you have one, because they're electrifying. You are an incredible speaker on stage, and one of my top favorites, hands down. You're very entertaining, and you're able to have you have a way of bringing the complex to such a simple way that's understandable, but also not boring. You're very engaging. But with that, I want you to be able to take it from here however you want to. You just close out of how people can reach out to you. And I'll try not to interrupt because I want to mess with your jive, but continue on, sir.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for your kind words. I certainly appreciate that. As far as I'm just going to address right now, if somebody's interested in learning more, finding out how, I may be able to be of assistance, to be of value, the best way is to just shoot me an email. And I'll go ahead and just tell you, here's my personal email address. It's JJ, just the initials JJ at jjchilders.com. So that's JJChilders.com. So JJChilders.com. Just shoot me an email and say, hey, I heard you on, Tom Bassino's show, Leverage to Build Wealth. It was amazing. Feel free to, expound upon that as much as you'd like to. And just say, here's what I'm kind of interested in. And I've got a link to a calendar where we could have kind of an initial consultation to see if I may be a fit. If I am, that's great. If not, that's fine too. So we just want to make sure that I wanted to give everybody kind of that opportunity. So JJChilders.com. Tom, I tell you, one of the things, we talked earlier, in the show that we were going to talk about taxes. So I want to hit on that because I know that's something that's kind of near and dear to everyone's heart. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that I'm going to cover the fact that the system is rigged. 100% absolutely thoroughly rigged against individuals in favor of businesses. And what I share with that to demonstrate how the system is rigged is that basically as individuals, here's how it works. We make money, we pay taxes on that money, and think about your paycheck. Taxes are taken out already. You don't even get the option. So you make money, taxes are taken out, you get to spend what's left over. Well, what if there's not enough left over to take care of all of your wants and needs? Who suffers? Well, you do as an individual. Well, let's take a look at businesses now. Businesses, they make money, they spend that money, they have access to all of it. They spend money on whatever is ordinary and necessary for their business expenses. Those business expenses are deductible. So then after all of that, if there's not enough, then we pay taxes on what's left over. Well, what if there's not enough left over? Or what if there's none left over after we took care of all our wants and needs? As long as those were deductible expenses, now our taxes may be zero. One of the things that I love is there was a Supreme Court case, Gregory versus Helvering. And the Justice, George Sutherland, writing in the majority, or writing in the opinion for the majority, basically said, there is nothing, we have the right, in fact, to avoid paying taxes. He said, to pay as little in taxes or altogether avoid them. He said that right cannot be doubted. And that's the United States Supreme Court saying our ability to pay zero taxes cannot be doubted. But he pointed out in there, he says, by means which the law permits. Yes. Well, that's what's called loopholes. We've got to make sure that we know what the loopholes are. A lot of times people, it's almost like we're talking about Sasquatch or something. When I talk about a loophole, they're going, well, I've heard of this elusive loophole. I've never actually encountered one. And I say, well, that's partly because you're not in business. We need to have, I tell people all the time, start a side hustle that's generating some income. And if you're able to shift part of your income on what you're doing over into the different legal entities, now you're able to take access to those deductions. Because here's the thing. As individuals, if we rent our house, is that deductible to us? No. If we are a business and we rent an office, is that deductible? Yes. Okay, well, what if we have utilities? Are utilities deductible to us as individuals? No. Deductible for the businesses? Yes. Internet access, deductible as individuals? No. Businesses? Yes. Our cell phones, individuals? No. Businesses? Yes. Computers, office supplies, meals in many instances, travel, hotels, airfare, all of these different things, vehicles. None of that is deductible to us as individuals, but it's all deductible to businesses. So the key is we've got to structure ourselves in a way, and especially for those people that are operating a business, sometimes people will do it through a sole proprietorship. And number one, you get no asset protection, and you're not going to get some of the same benefits that you can get through the use of business legal entities. So the key is you've got to identify how to structure yourself and then how to operate so that you can maximize all of the tremendous, invaluable benefits that are available to us through the use of those legal entities. And you've got to incorporate it into a plan that gives us that asset protection, the estate planning, and the tax reduction all at the same time. The final thing, you asked me a question earlier and I didn't answer it, and I want to make sure that I correct that. You said, what happens if you haven't set this up and then all of a sudden you say something happened that I'm afraid there may be a lawsuit here. Now what do I do? Well, if somebody calls me at that point, it's too late. And the reason I say it's too late is because if we try to set up a structure for you at that point and now you transfer assets out of your personal name into the name of one of these entities in an effort to hinder or delay prospective judgment creditors, meaning people who sue you. Now that's what's called a fraudulent transfer and conveyance. Now we think about that term, fraudulent transfer and conveyance. What's the first word? Fraudulent. We've now committed fraud. That's definitely, now we've gotten ourselves in even worse trouble. So we want to make sure that's just going to be set aside and all our efforts were for naught. So we've got to make sure that we do this. Again, the question I asked earlier, when is the time to have a plan? Before it's too late or after it's too late? We all know the answer is before, but most people set up burglar alarms after they've been burglarized. We've got to do it in advance. And the only time that we know is in advance is right now. So I always, tell people, I encourage people to take action. We're talking not just about you, but especially if you've got a family, you've got to put measures in place to protect your family. We work way too hard just to lose all our money through lawsuits, income taxes, and death taxes. That's what I help people to accomplish.
Wow. Thank you so very much, JJ. Anyone, I highly recommend you reach out to JJ. He is incredible. He is, I don't know, I can't say your praises any higher. And thank you so very much for being on the show. I would love to be able to have you another time down the road, and tune in. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for watching and listening in to today's episode. Please like, share, and subscribe so we can strengthen our mission and get the message out to others on how to leverage to build wealth. Who's next?